ladies and gentlemen, those who are here, and the many people that are online, we're going to begin the funeral services of Mr. Dylan Buckner. Rabbi Paul Cohen from Temple Jeremiah will be officiating.
Part of our tradition brings us a ritual that we perform before we formally begin the service. The ritual is called Kriya, which literally means a tearing. When our ancestors heard of the death of a loved one, they would literally tear the article of clothing that they were wearing, a sign of grief and sadness to be sure, but also a sign of the anger and the confusion that we feel when someone that we love is taken from our midst. The Kriya ribbon which we use today also serves as an outward sign to those that you will meet in the coming days that indeed there has been a tear in the fabric of your lives. So without having to say a word, people will see the ribbon and they will know how to respond accordingly. And at a time when it is perhaps most difficult to offer words of blessing, we're actually given words to recite. And I'll invite you to repeat after me, first in the Hebrew and then in the English. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech haolam Dayan ha'emet. Blessed are you, God, ruler of the universe, the judge of truth. Beloved friends, for those who are participating via live stream, those of us who will be speaking throughout this afternoon will be doing so without our masks on. Please know that we are being safe and physically distant from one another. Continue your weeping. Let the tears flow from your eyes. The sound of wailing is heard from Zion. Death has climbed through our windows. And so we remember in love and in trembling Dylan Buckner, who struggled against his pain, but whose life became a burden that was too heavy to bear. We realize, we know that he loved. We realize that he did know light in his life. And we realize that when darkness overcame him, he could not hold back. We pray to his creator and divine fashioner that his memory may live on and that his troubled soul be at rest. We pray further for life, for light, and for love. Let us choose life so that we might live, and so that we may continue our own lives in the way that he could no longer. May a great and heavenly peace descend upon us and all Israel and upon all humanity. can there be a lament greater than this? The loss of a life so young. In the depths of grief and despair, O God, keep us strong so that we may help the stricken to regain strength. Help us to support Dylan's family as they ask the inevitable questions. We grieve for what might have been, for joys unrealized, for tasks undone, for hopes thwarted, for growth arrested, for love blighted, and challenges unmet. Help us to bring comfort to Dylan's family and to his friends. Help us to raise them from the depth of sorrow slowly and lovingly. Help us to lead them from the night of desolation to the dawn of another day. Then the memory of our beloved Dylan can return gently, peacefully to our hearts. May his memory live among all of us, even in our grief, instructing us in the ways of living and helping us to find the meaning in the mystery of life. The poet wrote, "It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched." Death has taken our beloved Dylan. As we grieve in our darkened world, we know that in silence there is lamentation, in tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may Dylan's family and friends find the presence of our community who loves you, who supports you, who holds you. Oh God, be with them. For Dylan's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For all that was good, for all the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, and is now such a precious remembrance. For this and more, we offer our thanks to God, who brought Dylan into our lives. And in this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever new message of God's nearness. It teaches us of our kinship with the divine, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. Psalm 23, the Shepherd's Psalm. Adonai rohi lo echsar, Bino teshe yarbitzeni, al me menuchot, Yenahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev, Yancheni v'magle tzedek, Yancheni v'magle tzedek, leman shemo. Gam ki elech begets al mavet lo yirara, ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Taharoch lifanai, Shulchan Neged Zorerai. Dishanta Vashem Roshi Kosi Revaya Ach Tov Chesed Yirdefuni Kol Yemei Chayai Veshavti Bevet Adonai Leorech Yamim. Adonai Roi Lo Echsar. Adonai Roi Lo Echsar. In the pamphlet you received, you'll find the words of the English translation of Psalm 23, and I invite you, if you wish, to join together with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief in the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave and that there is strength in faith. With Job, we say, Adonai Natan, God, you have given. You gave us our loved one, Dylan Buckner, who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai Lakach, God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of strength and trust, before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and your love. As we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. Amen. Our tradition teaches that words that come from the heart go straight to the heart. And as we continue this tribute of love to Dylan's life, we do so with the words of his family. We'll be hearing first from his mother, Karen, his father, Chris, his brother, Ethan, and his uncle, Howie.
I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your schedules to grieve along with us. No parent should have to give a eulogy for their child, certainly not for one 18 years old who had such a bright future ahead of him. But here I find myself forced to do so. As saddened as I am, I'm going to try and focus on the joys Dylan brought to me and others during his all too short life. For the benefit of those not from this community, the night following Dylan's passing Several of his teammates and their families organized a service at a community church where the kids could go and grieve together. Following this heartfelt service was a candlelight vigil at the park across the street. Through the powers of social media, word spread quickly, and hundreds of people joined us that Friday evening. We wore masks, gloves, and hats, and yet we were together. And while safe, it did cause me several times to say, "I'm sorry, but with everyone all bundled up and in the dark, who are you?" as they poured out their wonderful thoughts to me. I cannot express enough gratitude to those who organized that event, but because it reminded me of the power of a hug, the power of a held hand, the power of a kind spoken word, not texted or Snapchatted or Instagram. COVID has robbed us of these small things that our emotional well-being craves. I know Dylan would be with us today if COVID hadn't prevented him from being in person working on projects with classmates, from being in person to work out with his teammates, being able to grab a burger or tacos and just hang with his friends in a restaurant. While on Thursday, that was just a speculation of mine, Friday's event and the way it affected me has given me all the conviction I need to know that Dylan's death was COVID-related. As much as I struggled to put this together, I had the benefit of having just read Dylan's college application essays and self-reflections. Dylan had 10 applications submitted, including 4 last-minute ones we completed just 6 days ago. We fist bumped after the last one was submitted. I thought it was our last college application, not our last fist bump. Much of what follows is Dylan's own words from those applications. I only wish he was in the right state of mind where he could have truly believed his own words on just how truly special he was. Dylan was proud of his empathy for others. He was always looking out for the other person. A quick story. When Dylan was a baby until he was 5, he went to daycare. At the end of his time there, the teachers held graduation. Each child was presented with a certificate highlighting a single special ability. Some certificates highlighted a child's artistic ability, another recognized their ability to be constantly active, but Dylan received a certificate for being the most empathetic. His caregivers were most impressed with his innate desire to look out for others and think of their feelings. It was a trait that was apparent at 5 years old, and a trait that we are proud to say he exhibited until his very last days. He was happiest when he could help someone else. He never wanted to be a burden to anyone. He never wanted to impose. He wanted to be the helper, not the one who needed help. In one of Dylan's college essays, he wrote, "Although intelligence and athletic abilities are qualities I cherish, my goal is to exercise empathy. I learn from others' experiences instead of judging. When I can, I offer advice, but oftentimes I just listen and offer a shoulder to cry on. I treat my friends like family, knowing that life is as much a team game as it is an individual sport." Dylan was well known and prided himself on his work ethic. As he wrote to one college, "I am at my happiest on a productive Saturday afternoons, checking things off my calendar like a shopping list. When I am in the driver's seat, I make the daily grind fun. It's my choice to stay busy, as opposed to kicking back and relaxing. I enjoy my free time too, but I usually opt to pack the day with activity. Training for football is my free time and is my getaway. It's my release from the world of stress. Is it always enjoyable? No, but it's always worth it." 2 more just quick random stories that I hope help illuminate just who he was. First, he told me a story about his honors Spanish class sophomore year. Dylan was frustrated with the process related to the speaking portion of graded work. Dylan's perception of the process was that the class was divided into groups. The teacher walked around to listen to each group's interaction and then would determine each student's grade by what she heard in her 5 minutes of listening to the group discussion. Too often, Dylan was frustrated as kids in his group talked over one another and dominated the conversation, all to ensure they got their A, while other team members never got a chance to speak or found themselves having to repeat what one of their louder classmates had already said. Dylan felt the need to join a different group of students, those he didn't know nearly as well. Using his quarterback skills, he organized the group so that each student had a section to speak to and an order in which to speak. So when the teacher came to observe, each student was able to have a turn speaking. Each could demonstrate their knowledge to the teacher, and no one spoke over one another. Everyone's experience was more pleasurable, and everyone's grade improved. Second little story, Dylan had a college interview for MIT not very long ago. All Dylan knew was the alumni's name was Susan, and he knew nothing else about her. Come to find out, she claimed she knew nothing about Dylan other than his name. She didn't know he was a football player. She didn't even know if MIT's football team was any good. Now, Dylan had spoken to dozens of coaches, and I never gave it a thought. I knew they would go well. But this time, I truly wondered to myself, what in the world is he going to talk to her about? But after the interview, Dylan told me it went solid. Luckily, I had by now learned that in Dylan vernacular, that meant went well. When I asked what they discussed, he said he talked about being okay if he was being accepted, that he might be in the bottom half of the class. He said he told her he knew what it was like to not be the smartest kid in the class. He always had to work harder than most for his A's, and he was okay with that. He would be fine as long as he could be a contributor in group work and be a good class teammate. She said she was the same way and was pleased to hear Dylan's response. Susan also asked about any new hobbies he had picked up during COVID, and they discussed meditation. Dylan had learned meditation in last year's gym class, where apparently it worked so well he fell asleep and snored loudly during the class. The alumni and Dylan compared different meditation practices. The conversation in all lasted nearly an hour. I agreed with Dylan's assessment. It went solid. My birthday was the day before Dylan passed. That evening, he gave me a birthday card that said, "Hey, Mom, I hope you had a good and relaxing birthday. Thank you for helping me with college and depression stuff. I really appreciate it. I promise I will try and talk to you more, and hopefully we can go on runs this spring. I would give anything to have the opportunity to run with my son this spring." Dylan and I were very structured in our lives. We had a routine of walking our dog every night after dinner. I'm going to continue this routine. Every night around 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I will carry a candle on my walk and hope to feel his presence. If you live nearby and see me on my lighted journey, please feel free to join and walk along with me and Dylan's spirit. I can honestly say I feel like I did everything I could to help Dylan get better, and I am frustrated that it still wasn't enough. For those whose life Dylan touched, please pay it forward. Be there for someone else who needs you. Be kind and inclusive. If you are a parent, give your kids an extra hug. If you are a child, please give your parents a kiss and tell them I love you. Dylan, you will always, always be my baby, and I will carry you in my heart forever.
thank everyone for the outpouring of support that we've received since Dylan's death. The calls, the impromptu visits, the texts, the emails, the Facebook postings, the Twitter postings, the wonderful Instagram tributes. As Karen explained in some detail, the fantastic event at the church, and even more, the reception at the Village Green later. Was very touching and be a great memory of this terrible time. Thanks also for the flowers and the food. Over the next weeks, I hope to respond and thank everyone, but for now I'll just list the categories of people that have been so supportive. Those categories include family, very broadly defined, my current friends, Dylan's friends, Dylan's friends' parents, Dylan's teammates, Dylan's current coaches, Dylan's former coaches, my old friends I haven't spoken to in 35 years. Interestingly, those were football players. GBN administration, Ethan's friends, parents of Ethan's friends. Not to be forgotten, friends of Dylan I don't know, people I don't know, and people who've never met Dylan, Karen, Ethan, or me. So thank you for that outpouring of support. One thing I haven't seen on social media and the various postings is debate on whether football concussions could have contributed to Dylan's depression and suicide. Unfortunately, over the years, coaching junior Spartans and attending GBN football games, I saw some concussions. However, I never saw one involving Dylan, and I'm not aware of Dylan being concussed, although it's certainly possible. One of the things I like about being involved in football and having sons involved in football is that in general, across the sport, and certainly in the junior Spartans and at GBN, there's far less hitting than was ever done when we were kids and I played football. Lower your head was a common refrain when I was a kid. Lead with your head was a common refrain when I was a kid. I don't think anyone ever said to use your helmet as a weapon, but it wasn't uncommon. I know in the junior Spartan program and at GBN that simply doesn't happen. And the daily scrimmages, daily Omaha drills, and other high contact activities just simply don't exist in Northbrook. So I don't know if concussions contributed to Dylan's depression and suicide, but we're going to find out. I'm happy to share that as a result of sharing Dylan's story with NBC5 in Chicago, the fine reporter on that story connected me with the Boston University group, and we were able to donate Dylan's brain for CTE research as part of an ongoing study on youth football players. Unfortunately, I've learned that brain research takes a long time, approximately a year. I do plan to share the results on Facebook and Twitter when I get them. So how do we get over Dylan's death? What would Dylan do? What would Dylan want us to do? As Rabbi Cohen told Karen and I, you don't get over Dylan's death, but you can move through it and hopefully find something positive in it. Take lemons and make lemonade. So throughout my remarks, I'm going to try to be mentioning ways we can try and do just that. What would Dylan do? He'd check in on his friends. He'd talk to them, really talk to them, and make sure they were okay. It's the best way to prevent suicide. It's okay not to be okay. You're not alone. Dylan would work out. He loved to work out and train, and I'm sure he'd be dedicating his workouts to his friends. He'd invite his friends to work out with him. He'd do a lot of the things that all of you have already done. Provide heartfelt best wishes to the family. Provide food and other tributes. Donate money and time to worthy causes to make things better. Like some of you have done, he'd engage in constructive dialogue and take action for change. like the change.org petition, some of the video messages, and engage in discussions with GBN administration. I was very proud of some of the messages I saw, some of the courageous messages I saw by kids in the GBN community. The most effective of these messages proposed reasonable, actionable alternatives, like the changes that were ultimately made to finals and the access that the football team was able to obtain for the drone candle photos. As you go through life, you will find that you just can't tell a person or institution they need to do more. You need to tell them specific, reasonable things they need to do in order to be effective. What would Dylan do? He'd vote. Dylan was 18, and I'm glad I got to see him vote. Make your own decisions about who to vote for, but please make sure you vote once you are 18 and take part in determining the political leaders of our communities, state, and country. Perhaps as you get older, you can consider public service by volunteering for or running for office. When I was a kid, I read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or maybe that book wasn't out yet, but it was at the time still a writing by the author of that book, Stephen R. Covey. A message that stood with me throughout my life, and I relayed to Dylan and Ethan, was you always reap what you sow. There are no shortcuts. I didn't have a chance to look up the story specifically today, but the way I remember it, Covey tells of 2 farmers. One diligently plants crops in the spring, rises early each day, and works all spring, summer, and fall to water, fertilize, and care for the crops. And as a result of all his hard work over the year, he enjoys a bountiful harvest at the end of the year that he is able to use to support his family and community. The other farmer spends his spring, summer, and fall sleeping in and goofing off all day. Finally, in the fall, that farmer realizes he needs money to support his family and hastily plants his crops. But of course, in just a few weeks, there are no crops, and come harvest time, he has no crops to harvest. You always reap what you sow. There are no shortcuts. The same lesson will apply throughout your life, whether it's getting the grades you want, getting into the college you want, having a successful career, having successful relationships, or beating Maine South on the football field. Dylan would want you to have a bountiful harvest in your life. He'd help you sow. You always reap what you sow. There are no shortcuts. I'd like to share some suicide stats with you. I suppose I should start this portion of the presentation with caution, mature material ahead. According to a July 2020 article in Live Well Health, the top 3 teen health risks are auto accidents, suicide, and guns in the home. First, auto accidents. I hope our kids always remember to drive safe, not to text and drive, and not to drink or smoke and drive. The number 2 cause of death for teens, suicide, I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But in terms of guns in the home, I wanted to mention that more than 50% of completed suicides, that's a suicide that's successful, are by firearm. Access to a firearm is a major predictor of completed successful suicide. Between 2007 and 2017, rates of teen suicide increased by 56%. I saw some information online about the continued increase since 2017, but we all know that it's happening. If you remember only one thing from my remarks today, I hope it will be my next few comments. Statistics estimate that roughly 1 in 11 high school students attempt suicide. Attempting suicide does not mean that they were successful. but statistics estimate that roughly 1 in 11 high school students attempt suicide. This would be approximately 45 attempts per year at a school with 2,000 students. That would be approximately 45 attempts per year at a school with approximately 2,000 students. Per the CDC, there is 1 successful suicide, 1 completed suicide for every 25 suicide attempts. Dylan was planning to study statistics, possibly in college. I'm also a fan of statistics. So statistically speaking, a school with 2,000 students might expect 2 deaths by suicide each year. Statistically speaking, a school with 2,000 students might expect 2 deaths by suicide each year. In describing Dylan to a new acquaintance many years ago, I said, Dylan's going to have a great life. He can do anything. He's smart, good looking, a great athlete, and everybody likes him. He'll be able to do whatever he wants. Dylan's a lot like his mother. I really believed that until September of last year. Then on a Sunday night, as I was going to bed, Dylan was exiting the shower after a late workout, which was not unusual. We said our goodnights and I went to sleep. Less than an hour later, I was awoken by a ring of Karen's cell phone. Karen answered the phone and I overheard, "Mrs. Buckner, this is Officer so-and-so. Your son Dylan has made an attempt on his life." I know Karen and I were both thinking the same thing. He's got to have the wrong number. Dylan's in his bedroom asleep. Unfortunately, the officer had the correct number. The next few hours were agonizing. In a way I have never experienced. Dylan had jumped from a bridge. We knew only that he was alive when the ambulance arrived. The ambulance was leaving the bottom of the bridge as we arrived at the top of the bridge, so we couldn't see Dylan. Surveying the scene, I thought it unlikely anyone could survive a fall from the bridge. We were told Dylan was being taken to one hospital and immediately left the scene in a panic to go to that nearby hospital. In fact, Dylan was taken to another hospital a bit further away that was a higher level trauma center given the possible nature of Dylan's expected injuries. But for about 2 hours, we didn't know this. We didn't know where Dylan was, and no one could find him. We didn't know anything about his condition, even if he was alive. I hope Rabbi Cohen will forgive me for saying, at that time I didn't think of myself as very religious. But in those moments I prayed. Finally, Dylan was located, and we were told he was moving all of his extremities. It was another 30 minutes until we got to the hospital, where we were promptly taken into a private waiting room, and social workers arrived. I feared the worst. But the doctor soon arrived and told us that miraculously, Dylan had survived the fall with only minor physical injuries. After another day or so of tests, internal injuries were ruled out as well. No one knows how Dylan survived. No one witnessed the fall, and Dylan doesn't remember it. While he was physically okay, Karen and I first became aware at that time that Dylan was suffering from depression. Medical journals say possible causes of depression include a combination of biological, psychological, and social sources of distress. Increasingly, research suggests that these factors may cause changes in brain function, including altered activity of certain neuron circuits in the brain. The persistent feeling of sadness or loss of interest that characterize major depression can lead to a range of behavioral and physical symptoms. These may include changes in sleep, appetite, energy level, concentration, daily behavior, none of which we witnessed in Dylan, or self-esteem. Self-esteem certainly turned out to be an issue in Dylan's depression, but of course, unless someone tells you that, it's not always obvious. Depression can also be associated with thoughts of suicide. The mainstay of treatment for depression is usually medication, talk therapy, or a combination of the two. Increasingly, research suggests these treatments may normalize brain changes associated with depression. How common is depression? The same medical journals say depression is, quote, very common, with more than 3 million US cases per year. Dylan had been undergoing intensive inpatient and outpatient therapy and trying a variety of medications since the September incident with little improvement in his condition. So what's the story about what happened last Thursday? Dylan was a writer for Torch, the Buckner North student newspaper. If I'm correct, the questions answered by a good news story are who, what, when, where, how, and why. The who is easy, Dylan. The what is lost his battle to depression. Said differently, he completed suicide. How? By jumping from a high floor of a hotel. When? Last Thursday at approximately 3 p.m. Where? A hotel in Deerfield, which for those not from the area, is a town that neighbors Northbrook, where we live. A good Torch editor might ask, what was Dylan doing at a hotel at 3 p.m. on a Thursday? Well, he wasn't with anyone, meeting anyone, or going to a party. No drugs or alcohol were involved. In fact, Dylan was at school at home with me and Ethan until at least 2:30 when I went out to buy food for our dog. As I was leaving, Dylan texted me that he was going to spend some time after school delivering food for DoorDash, which was certainly not unusual as he was saving money for a new car. But instead, he drove to the hotel, left his car keys, his phone, and his money in his unlocked car, and jumped. But why? Karen and I talked with Dylan about his mental health a lot since September. He promised many times to talk to us if he ever started having suicidal thoughts again. I begged him to come to me if he ever got in that dark place again. We told him we loved him no matter what and that we would do anything to help him get better. There were no arguments or conflicts. He wanted to get better, he just didn't know how. After another near miss, Dylan explained that when he lost control of his brain, he just wasn't able to come to us and tell us. It also became clear to me that Dylan was battling his condition on a daily, hourly, and sometimes minute-by-minute basis. So why did Dylan do it? After all, the person who completes suicide dies once. Those left behind die 1,000 deaths trying to understand why. Reviewing research on suicide, I read, the tragic thing is that many of those who consider suicide don't really want to die, they just don't know how to deal with the pain they're experiencing. Another quote, sometimes people who commit suicide are not fully aware or in such a dark place that they don't consider that taking their own life will create a huge amount of pain for their friends and loved ones left behind. Some of the quotes that I think describe Dylan's state of mind. The depressed person who tries to kill herself doesn't do so out of hopelessness or a belief that life's positives and negatives do not even out, and surely not because death suddenly seems appealing. The person in whom invisible agony reaches a certain unendurable level will kill herself in the same way a trapped person will eventually jump from the window of a burning high-rise. Their terror of falling from a great height is still just as great as it would be for you or me. The variable here is that other terror, the fire's flames. When the flames get close enough, falling to death becomes the slightly less terrible of two terrors. And yet nobody down on the sidewalk, looking up and yelling, "Don't," and "hang on," can understand the jump. You'd have to have personally been trapped and felt flames to really understand a terror way beyond falling. Dialogue I found from a book. Do you really want to die? Asks one character. No one commits suicide because they want to die, says the other. Then why do they do it? Because they want to stop the pain. Lastly, it's not seen as insane when a military member, under an attack that will inevitably lead to his death, chooses to take his own life first. In fact, this act has been encouraged for centuries and is accepted even now as an honorable reason to do the deed. How is it any different when you are under attack by your own mind? I think that's why he did it. He wanted to stop the pain of being attacked by his own mind. So how do we get over this? You don't get over it. But you can move through it and maybe find something positive in it. Take lemons and make lemonade. One way we can all do that is to contribute to and participate in suicide prevention. Recognize the risk factors. Contributing factors for suicide include loneliness, depression, family problems, and substance abuse. As a parent, those may not be easy to identify. Parents have to talk with their kids, really talk, to uncover these. Kids, talk to your parents. I can assure you that they love you unconditionally. Be honest with them. In terms of substance abuse, I would suggest that if you are using substances other than alcohol or marijuana in any amount, you are in crisis and should seek help. Teens who have good communication with at least one adult are less likely to engage in risk behaviors and less likely to become depressed. Note that quote says at least one adult. Doesn't have to be a parent. Find an adult you trust and talk to them. Kids. Studies show that if you're able to talk to someone regularly, particularly in a face-to-face situation like a close friend or counselor, you're less likely to attempt suicide. Able to talk to someone regularly, particularly in a face-to-face situation. Put the phone down. If you haven't seen the documentary, The Social Network, to see what the phone is doing to you, I highly recommend seeing it. We all need to recognize the warning signs of suicidal thoughts in teens, which include feeling like a burden, being isolated, increasing anxiety, feeling trapped or in unbearable pain, increased substance use, looking for a way to access lethal means, increasing anger or rage, extreme mood swings, expressing hopelessness, sleeping too little or too much, talking or posting about wanting to die, making plans for suicide. This to me is the key warning sign. In my opinion, if you have made plans for suicide, you are in crisis and need to seek help, please. As I said before, many of the warning signs that I mentioned are not easy to spot. And in fact, parents, your kids may try to hide them from you. So you really have to talk to your kids. Kids and parents, please use the resources available. If you are in crisis, ask for help. Kids, help your friends. When in crisis, Dylan couldn't talk to us, but he would talk to his friends. Be kind. Loosen your friend groups. Let other kids into your friend groups. Dylan often felt like the kid eating alone in the lunchroom on Friday and Saturday nights. If you can invite a friend to a birthday party on Saturday afternoon, you can invite them into your friend group for a party on Saturday night. If you can ask a friend to drive you to a party or pick you up from one, you can invite that friend to the party and they can still be a designated driver. Coach Purdy and I were speaking and agreed that Dylan was going to change the world. After that discussion, I realized Dylan did. Dylan did change the world. He packed all of the goodness most people do in a 75 or 80-year life into 18 years. He touched all of us. Let his goodness live on in you and inspire you for the rest of your lives. Please take Karen and I along on your journeys. Please don't leave us behind. A final thought I want to leave you with. I recently saw a movie called Downhill. It was a movie with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who I always enjoyed in Seinfeld and Veep, and with Will Ferrell. By no means a classic, but a good movie I enjoyed. Without giving away the plot, there's a scene where Will Ferrell's character reminds his family of the best way to live your life. He says, "Today is all we've got." No one is promised tomorrow. If, God forbid, you knew you, your friends, or loved ones were not going to be around tomorrow, what would you tell them today? Today is all we've got. I would give everything I have and everything I'm ever going to have, including my life, to bring Dylan back. Suicide is real.
Hello. For those that don't know me, I'm Ethan Buckner. I'm Dylan's brother. I'm a freshman at GBN. And also, going back to my mom's speech, if you want to know what my certificate said, it said I was the best negotiator. So, to say me and Dylan were slightly different would be an understatement. I wrote this last night, so it won't be as long as my father's. So, pardon me if it's a little short. Dylan was almost like a brother to me. I say this because of one thing. Brothers aren't perfect. Dylan was. He showed me what the peak human being looked like, what an unstoppable work ethic looked like, what a natural-born leader looked like, what natural talent looks like. Dylan showed me what over 3,000 years of evolutionary perfection looks like. Dylan was everything I wanted to be, because why wouldn't I want to be perfect? But it wasn't the truth. Dylan was perfect on the outside, but he wasn't perfect on the inside. My favorite way of explaining depression is this. Sadness is a normal human emotion people experience when things in their life are bad. Depression is that same exact sadness, but when everything is perfect. Dylan's life couldn't have been more perfect, and that's why Dylan had depression. No matter how many throwing sessions he had with his wide receivers, no matter how many speed workouts he went to, he couldn't escape his own depression. Dylan was able to win against depression for a long time, but on Thursday, he played his final game of football against depression, and he lost. I said this at the vigil, and I will say it again. Dylan wouldn't have won against depression for so long if it wasn't for the amazing people around him. Football is a team game after all. I've received around 100 messages from people who are affected by Dylan. And I can tell anyone who had a relationship with Dylan at all, thank you for giving my brother more time on this earth. If it weren't for you guys, I wouldn't be here. I'd be at home doing something really random or whatever I do on weekends or Monday mornings. I wouldn't be thinking about Dylan's death because it would have happened a really long time ago. You guys gave him the time he needed. You guys were Dylan's lifeline, and I can't thank you enough for the time you gave my brother, the time he spent making other people's lives better. That's what he liked to do, make other people's lives better. Dylan would stay up late at night, and I would ask him what he was doing. He almost always responded the same way. Someone needs me right now, and I'm just going to stay awake and talk with them. I think one of Dylan's biggest struggles was handling his own depression while keeping the depression of others at bay. Dylan wouldn't hesitate to risk his own well-being if it meant someone else had an easier light. Dylan's selflessness was yet another thing to add to his perfect personality. But that's the thing. Dylan wasn't perfect. Perfect people don't have flaws, and Dylan had a flaw, and that was his depression. Sadly, I didn't see that flaw until it was too late, because he didn't show me it. I said at the beginning of this that Dylan was almost like a brother to me, because in reality, brothers aren't perfect, but to me, he was, and I hate myself for thinking that he was perfect. Brothers aren't perfect, sisters aren't perfect, moms aren't perfect, and dads aren't perfect. There isn't a human being on this planet that's perfect, but Dylan Jacob Buckner was the closest thing to perfection that I've ever seen. I'm going to miss you a lot, Dylan, and I know everyone else will too. You made an impact on my life that I will never forget, because how can you forget near perfection? In the end, you were a brother to me, and you always will be. I'm going to miss the times of me going out to throw with you, even though I never threw the ball. I just snapped the ball and you threw to targets because I can't catch a ball to save my life. I'm going to miss spending time with you and your friends when you would let me. I'm going to miss just waking up and seeing you talking with the dog on the couch. I'm going to miss a lot of things about you, Dylan. I know that one thing that you always held dear and close to you was the ability that you could do to help everyone else out. The first football practice of yours that I went to in 2019, I believe, or it might have been 2020, I forget, I'm not good with dates, was when I was the water boy for your team, and you took a kid from his house, which is on the other side of town, to the school that you lived maybe a 5-minute walk away from, and then at the end of practice took him all the way back to the other side of town and then came home. You didn't care the time it took or the energy or whatever it took. You would not hesitate to help someone out. And I'm glad to see that even when Dylan wasn't gone, people have shown the same exact philosophy to me. Thank you, Avery Burrow, for driving me to lacrosse practice at 6 o'clock. I was not going to make my mom wake up for that. It's going to be really difficult, Dylan, explaining to my kids in how many years about why they don't have cousins from my side of the family. But I know that in the end, if you lasted longer than 18 years, you would have had the best damn kids I ever know, because you would have been a great father, because you were a great person. I know everyone's going to miss you a lot, and I'm going to miss you to the moon and back. Anyone who's part of the around 100 people who followed me on Instagram recently would know probably that my bio is, there's a rainbow after the storm, and there has to be a storm to get to the rainbow. Stuff gets better, I promise. And I wish Dylan knew that things were going to get better. You're a brother to me, Dylan, and you always will be. Lilo misses her nap time buddy, and so do I. Thank you.
I'd like to follow that one. I'd like to thank the community of Northbrook for their outpouring love and support for my sister, Ethan, and Chris. Nothing can stop their pain from what happened on Thursday, but seeing how this community has rallied around them certainly has eased their pain. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the crazy brother, crazy uncle from New Jersey. I am standing up here today not as the crazy uncle, but a very proud uncle of Ethan and Dylan. Two amazing young men who were raised the right way. I never thought I'd be asked to speak about my nephew in this way. The thought alone breaks my heart. I sat and thought about the words that describe Dylan. Of course, the following came to mind: smart, funny, educated, caring, hardworking, driven. The list goes on and on. Then I thought of the word prepared. Dylan was always prepared. At an early age, I wasn't going to be able to bond with Dylan on an educational level. At 6, maybe even younger, he was already smarter than I was. That shouldn't shock anyone who knows my sister. My sister got all the looks and the brains, and I got the, 50 years later, and we're trying to figure that out. She clearly passed on her brains and good looks to Dylan and Ethan. The one thing I was going to be able to bond with Dylan on was sports, and especially football. He loved the game, and so did I. I would talk to Dylan every Thursday night before a game. At first, the conversation was get a good night's sleep, eat well, try to stick to a normal routine. The normal stuff you would say to his star quarterback to try to get him to relax. What I didn't expect was the preparation and the laser focus that Dylan had before each game. As he got older, I thought I was talking to a D1 offensive coordinator. He would say, Uncle Howie, they have a good D-line, a few D1 players, but if we can establish the run, we should be able to catch them sleeping, go over the top, and beat them in the air. Their weak side corner is a little slow. I have better wide receivers than their D-backs. I think we have a good game plan. We've had a good practices all week, and we are ready. I was shocked at how well prepared and how much Dylan loved to prepare for an opponent, and he was damn good at his preparation. To his teammates, you may not have won every game, but I can assure you that number 7 was the best prepared quarterback you could ever ask for, and you wanted him on your team. You wanted that ball in Dylan's hands come crunch time. That preparation spilled over into the classroom. Just look at his GPA. 2 weeks ago, we were all in Florida for the holidays. Dylan came to me and asked if I knew anything about Bitcoin. I said, I really don't, but I have a few friends of mine who are involved with it in New York. He said, I am still teaching myself and learning about it. I want to make sure I'm prepared. But when I'm prepared, can you put me in touch with them so I can learn more about them and ask them some questions? Some may have hesitated to let an 18-year-old kid call a hedge fund guy, but my answer was 100% yes. I didn't even think twice about it. I knew if Dylan said he was prepared for him to speak to someone, he may very well be smarter than the person I put him on the phone with. That is why the word prepared came to mind. To my sister, you are the strongest person I know. Any person that knows you and who knew Dylan knew you were behind his drive, his personality, and his great demeanor. You, Ethan, and Chris did everything, and I mean everything you could for Dylan. Don't you dare for 1 minute ever think differently. This disease is awful. To the hundreds of kids watching this horrible event, I want to issue you all a number 7 challenge. If you are a friend, a teammate, a colleague, the number 7 challenge is this. I want you all to do an extra 7 minutes a day of something to prepare yourself or make yourself better, just like Dylan did every day. In the classroom, do 7 minutes of extra reading. Take an extra 7 minutes to do an additional math problem. Do an extra 7 minutes of homework to make yourself better. In sports, do 7 minutes of extra film study. Stay after practice for 7 minutes and do some extra work. Get to practice 7 minutes early and throw with a teammate. Take 7 minutes to help a friend. Take 7 minutes to listen to a friend in need. Put your phone down for 7 minutes and talk to your brother or sister. Take 7 minutes to minutes to yourself and just relax. Reflect on the day. Take 7 minutes to call your grandparents and tell them you love them. Sit at the dinner for 7 minutes and just talk to your family. Do 7 minutes of community service. Take 7 minutes just to be nice. That's what Dylan would do. 7 minutes a day, 49 minutes a week, 196 minutes a month, 2,352 minutes a year. Think about that. If each one of you put 2,352 minutes a year of Dylan Buckner back into this world, we could all make this world a better place. 7 minutes for number 7. Dylan, may God bless you and keep you. I love you, buddy.
In the Torah portion for this week, from the book of Exodus, God instructs Moses, commands Moses to go and speak to the Pharaoh of Egypt and to demand that the Pharaoh let the Israelites, the children of Israel, go. Moses doesn't think he's up to the task. He says, I don't speak very well. Why will they listen to me? You need to choose someone else. And God said to Moses that you will have someone with you. You will have someone who will be with you. You have somebody who will be with you. And that person is Aaron, your brother. He will go with you. He will give you strength to take on this mission. And indeed, our sages taught that we are supposed to be like Aaron. Why? Because Aaron loved shalom. He loved what we often translate as peace, but better as wholeness. That his leadership style and what he was able to bring to Moses was this ability to create a sense of wholeness in others. Right? So much so that he focused on if there were people who were quarreling with one another, that he would step in. If there was somebody in need, he would be there to help create that sense of wholeness. And this is what Dylan did in his life. He was there to help bring shalom, to help bring wholeness, to help bring peace to those who were struggling, to those who were in need. Right? He didn't try to be Moses. He didn't need to be Moses. Right? I was thinking especially, Karen, of what you had shared, right? That he didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. He didn't have to be, Chris, you said, he didn't have to be the best athlete, right? He did work so hard. He was one of the hardest workers in the classroom, on the field, and in life, creating that sense of wholeness. That sense of wholeness, I think, is captured also in this word empathy, that he was able to not only to be in the shoes of another person, but to really understand and be sensitive to what that person needed in that moment. He never wanted to let anyone down. His friends, his teachers, his coaches, and most of all, his family. He wanted shalom. He wanted wholeness. He was a fighter. He was fiercely competitive, and he continued to power through every challenge that was put before him. Karen and Chris shared with me that this began even before he was born, that he was going to power through a particularly difficult moment where it was unsure of what would happen, that Dylan persevered and came in to our world. They also shared with me, and I didn't know this about Dylan, and now I know why I didn't know this about Dylan, that he had food allergies, some that were pretty severe. And he never wanted anyone to make a fuss. He never, made somebody make him something special or different than what everybody else was having. He knew what he could eat and what he couldn't eat, and he could take care of that for himself. Just a sense of who he was and how he lived his life. Karen and Chris shared with me that a friend of his recently, I think for his 18th birthday, made him a cake with an ingredient that he couldn't eat. And rather than saying something about it in that moment, he said thank you, and he accepted it. And when asked later, how was it? It was delicious, right? That it was just part of his nature, not to want to make anyone feel uncomfortable or less than whole. He was smart. His teachers loved him. He was a model student. As we were leaving the church on Friday evening, I was walking with a person I didn't recognize because they were wearing a mask and I was wearing a mask. Turns out it was his coach. And he told me that he shared with me he wanted a team of Dylans, right? That people who would work so hard, who were leaders, and who were both respected and worthy of that respect. He stood up for so many in middle school who were being bullied. Dylan was the definition of an upstander, wanting to, again, provide wholeness, shalom, to a person who was in need. Also shared with me a story when he went to a summer camp in middle school. He immediately befriended a boy with special needs and formed this deep friendship for which his family was so very, very grateful. Not a surprise. Dylan became bar mitzvah at Temple Jeremiah some 5 years ago. And I was recalling the Devar Torah that he wrote. And the lesson that he taught was a lesson about leadership, coming from the story of Joseph and how a leader has to anticipate the unintended consequences of his leadership. And Joseph, as a young man, wasn't quite able to do that. But he grew into that, and he brought forward this sense of leadership into his own life, seeing this as central to the Torah portion. And he said in that Devar Torah, I know the difference between a good leader and a bad one. And it was interesting. He said, as many of you know, I play sports. And at that time, it was of the scandal involving Tom Brady and the Deflategate, and how Tom should have known better, and that certainly Dylan knew better. He also shared in his Tikkun Olam project that it was a project that he had taken on because he had a personal connection to it, that his eyesight needed correction. And he recognized that there were a lot of people who needed that same kind of correction who couldn't afford it, who couldn't afford a prescription. And so he collected and inspired others to share the glasses that they were no longer wearing, that were then repurposed and refurbished by through the Lions Club International. They have a recycling center. And typical of taking his own personal experience, that empathy of knowing what it's like not to be able to see well enough, and knowing that others would be in a position not to help themselves. He closed his Devar Torah with a prayer. Dear God, I pray when people have the chance to be leaders, that they will take the right actions to cause the reactions in those around them in the ways they intend. Dylan made the world better for so many, and so many have said the world is a better place for his having lived in it. Chris reflected on the choice of Dylan's Hebrew name, Elijah or Eliyahu, the one who we welcome into our homes at Passover, the one who will announce the messianic age, or the shalom, the age of shalom, of wholeness and peace. Elijah in the Bible doesn't die in the normal way of human beings. He's carried up to heaven in a fiery chariot, witnessed by his disciple Elisha. Elijah thus becomes this conduit between heaven and earth, a warm and welcoming presence, a presence for our satyrs, a presence for welcoming new babies into the world, the great bringer of shalom, of wholeness. That's our task now for one another, to bring this sense of shalom, this wholeness, back into our lives, back into the world. It's the message of hope and healing that it's brought to us by the prophet whose name is Malachi, who said the words of God, "Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the great and awesome day of Adonai. He shall reconcile parents with children and children with their parents. He will bring shalom, not only between parents and children, but among all people." We have this now as our mission, to take our broken hearts, to share our anger, our despair, our sadness, and those wonderful stories that are Dylan's stories, to bring shalom to one another, to fulfill the words of the prophet, to be that presence of Elijah that we so desperately need in this moment. It's in this way that we will continue to honor the memory of Dylan Jacob Buckner, a leader, a son, a brother, a grandson, a nephew, a beloved friend and teammate. May his memory always be for a blessing. And to this let us say, Amen. I invite you to please rise for the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Et Nishmat Eliyahu Harel, Shalach Leolamo, Bal HaRachamim, Yastirehu Beseter Kanafav Leolamim, Vayitzror Bitzor HaChaim Et Nishmato, Adonai Unachalato, V'yanuach B'shalom Al Mishkavo, V'nomar, Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Dylan Jacob Buckner, Eliyahu Harel, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and together we say, Amen. We conclude our service here at the chapel with the words of the Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, that ironically speaks nothing of death. It speaks only of praise of God. Words of praise that thank you for the life and the spirit of Dylan that continues to live on in each and every one of us. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Bi'alma divrach hirute v'amlich malchute, B'chayechon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala u'v'zman kariv, v'imru Amen. Yehe shmei Rabbah mevorach leolam olmei olmaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei dekudsha barichu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran bi'alma v'imru Amen. Yehe shlama Rabbah min Shemaya, v'chayim alinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, alinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru Amen. May God grant peace, grant shalom to all who mourn the passing of Dylan Buckner, and bring comfort to all who are bereaved among us. And together we say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the services here at the chapel. And for the over 700 screens that are watching, which translates into thousands of people, the family says thank you for being here. Memorial contributions in his memory to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or the GBN Booster Club would be appreciated. That information is on the service folder, and for those of you who are online, that information is on our website. This concludes the service.